Victims of the Nazi Era by Mario Danis. During World War II, the millions of innocent civilians were killed by Nazis. The civilians were not only of Jewish descent, but many other groups were massacred. This included Roma, Gypsies, people with disabilities, Poles, Soviet prisoners of war, and Afro-Germans. The Nazis also identified political dissents, Jehovah's Witnesses, and so-called social enemies and securists, either because they constantly opposed the Nazi regime or some aspect of their behavior did not fit Nazi perceptions of social norms. The Nazis also persecuted authors and artists whose works they considered subversive. The first group that was persecuted were Romans. While Nazi ideology targeted Jews as the primary enemy of Germany, the Nazis also targeted Roma, Gypsies, on racial grounds, drawing on traditional prejudice in German society. The Nazis termed Roma as prone by race to be work-shy and asocial, with an inherent inclination to engage in petty crime. Among the first killed in the mobile bands cast at the Kelmo killing center. Later, the SS police and authorities supported more than 20,000 Roma to the Auschwitz-Birkenau camp, where the camp authorities killed almost all of them in gas chambers. Also, in Germany, occupied parts of the Soviet Union, tens of thousands of local Roma were shot on the grounds that they were spies for the Soviet Union officials. Another group of people that were persecuted were people with mental or physical disabilities. Nazis viewed institutionalized people with disabilities perceived as congenital to be a threat to the gene pool of the so-called German master race. Some 5,000 institutionalized small children with disabilities were murdered in institutions throughout Germany and Austria. Also, some 70,000 institutionalized adults were murdered in 6 killing centers, and thousands of prisoners no longer able to work were killed in concentration camps. The overwhelming majority of victims were murdered in gas chambers. The other victims were killed by starvation, delivered to untreated disease, poisoning, and lethal injection. Poles were also persecuted by Germans. The German occupation of Poland was exceptionally brutal. The Nazis considered Poles to be racially inferior. German police units shot thousands of Polish civilians and required all Polish males to perform forced labor. The Nazis sought to destroy the Polish culture by eliminating Polish political, religious, and intellectual leadership. In November 1942, the Germans expelled over 100,000 people from the Zamość region. Many were deported to Auschwitz and the Maidanek camp. Approximately 50,000 Polish children were taken from their families, transferred to the Reich, and subject to Germanization policy. It is estimated that the Germans killed at least 1.9 million non-Jewish Polish civilians during World War II. Afro-Germans. The fate of the Afro-German people from 1933 to 1944 in the Nazi and German-occupied territories ranged from isolation to persecution, sterilization, and medical experimentation, incarceration, brutality, and murder. Afro-German mulatto children were marginalized in German society, isolated socially, economically, and not allowed to attend university. Racial discrimination prohibited them from seeking most jobs, including service in the military. With the Nazis' rise to power, they became a target of racial and population policy. By 1933, the Gestapo, the German secret state police, had recently rounded up and forcibly sterilized many of them. Some were subject to medical experiments, others mysteriously disappeared. Jehovah's Witnesses. The Nazi regime also targeted Jehovah's Witnesses who refused to swear an oath to their regime or perform military service. Approximately 30,000 Jehovah's Witnesses were incarcerated in the concentration camp. Nearly a third of them died there. Another 250 were shot after being convicted by a military tribunal. Prisoners of war. Soviet prisoners of war. In 1941 to 1942, German military authorities and the German security police collaborated on a racist policy of more murdered Soviet prisoners of war. Around 3 million others were held in makeshift camps without proper shelter, food, or medicine, with the deliberate intent that they die. Approximately 2 million Soviet soldiers died as a result of their criminal neglect in the winter of 1941 through 1942. Even after the Germans permitted the remaining Soviet soldiers to survive so that the labor could be exploited, Soviet soldiers were generally incarcerated under harsher conditions, often in concentration camps, than any other group of prisoners of war. The last group targeted by the Nazis were political dissidents. Lastly, German criminal police officials arrested and incarcerated in concentration camps tens of thousands of so-called asocials, as well as real or perceived repeated criminal offenders. Even though they had not committed a new crime or violation, thousands of these so-called asocial and criminal prisoners were murdered in camps. This included artists and authors. The end.